As Chief Strategy Officer, I spend a lot of time, kind of investigating how our customers use technology to improve their operations. And one of the things that we do is then try and benchmark, the impact of that. So we're hoping to share that with you today and just look at, how best practices can help your own effectiveness. For today's agenda, you'll learn a little bit about Lockstep and our experience. Then we'll dive into what can you manage in AR? And it seems like an easy question, but it's not as easy as it appears. So we'll dig into that a little bit. Then we'll examine the realities of manual AR. We'll kind of look into and learn what are the 3 AR automation strategies that can be used to accelerate receivables. And with that stage set, we'll look into the benchmarks for automation and the impact that it can have on collections performance, basically by being able to measure reduction in past due or reduction in average days delinquent. A quick background on Lockstep. Lockstep is the publisher of Anytime Collect. Anytime Collect is an AR automation solution. It essentially makes it easier and faster for you to collect your cash. It also makes your bank balance bigger. Anytime Collect is in use by, in over 20 different industries, so broad array of different places, and over 170 companies globally. And we have thousands of users of the application and portal on a daily basis. We're also the leader in integration. We believe that connectivity has the power to, unlock productivity. So our integration platform has the most number of connectors in the industry, and it's growing. And we support whether it's on premises or in the cloud. Our integration platform makes all of the automation possible. We're also expanding into integrations such as CRM with Salesforce.com and other solutions. And if you don't see your platform on here, don't hesitate. We've got more coming out all the time, and we can turn those around very quickly. So let's jump into the topic. The first part is really thinking about what can you manage in accounts receivable. And it goes without saying, there's a significant amount of pressure on AR departments right now to collect cash. Just with the business contractions and things that are going on relative to the pandemic, everybody's wanting to focus on what can we pull in and what do we control. And management really plays a crucial role in reaching objectives. But what can you really manage? I mean, tactically manage. Our research suggests that it's not what most people think about. And so we want to share that because we talked to lots of controllers and AR managers in various industries regarding which metrics they monitor and why. And it revealed lots of metrics considered by leadership to be key to effective collections management, but they really didn't play a role. And so we looked at each metric individually and asked the question, can this metric be managed? Our criteria for quote unquote managing became that as a manager, you could directly influence the metric by asking somebody to do something differently. And as a result of that, the desired change in the metric would happen. So we did that, and our research confirmed our suspicion that some numbers just can't be managed no matter how hard you want to be able to change them, but that some metrics can be. So we put them in 3 different buckets of metrics. Each has their own sort of managerial value and purpose. At the very highest level, we said accounts receivable departments are measuring what we call business results. Business results are metrics such as working capital and days sales outstanding, and they represent really the culmination of all the efforts. As a manager, I might want to talk about managing my DSO, but business results are really ultimately unmanageable. If a manager could directly manage DSO, then every department would meet its target. You could just tell the team, hey, we got to lower the DSO. And the team would say, sure, no problem, let's get that done. But that doesn't happen. We also found there was a second kind of metric that, while not directly manageable, could be heavily influenced. And those are accounts receivable objectives. AR objectives are the specific targets that an organization is asking maybe an accounts receivable specialist or group to reach, like monthly collection goals. The hard part is AR objectives are not directly manageable either. To meet that collections goal requires consent from the customer. And we know the customers may have their own priorities and issues. And again, in the current economic environment, it may be outside your control to hit those collections goals. But what accounts receivable professionals can control is a third class of metric, which we call accounts receivable activities. These are the numbers that AR managers should be gathering, such as number of collection calls done today, number of emails, number of conversations, percentage of invoices influenced. This is fairly tactical stuff, but it's the stuff that AR staff and their managers actually do. AR activities are the metric that can actually be managed. Want more collection calls each week? Make it happen. Want more emails sent? Make that happen too. You know, you may have some kind of process or compliance issues, but then that's why you need AR automation. AR automation is the basis for managing its collections performance. Of course, the other metrics are important, but those numbers are really lagging indicators. Business results and AR objectives today are the results of AR activities last month. So if an AR team makes more calls in AR activity, then it will likely collect more cash in AR objectives. If more cash is collected, lower DSO and bigger bank balance will likely follow, which are the business results. And that's the important thing as we think through this. And so we've got a little poll question that we wanted to ask just about reporting. Give people a chance to respond to that. %89% so far, 91%. So obviously metrics are important. We do think when we looked at this and talked to people that oftentimes the activity metrics were not necessarily included in those dashboards, and they become pretty critical. And that's where we noticed there was a benchmarking gap, because while there's a lot of accounts receivable benchmarking services that cover business results, such as days sales outstanding, there's very little data available on which activities and how much have the biggest impact on collection performance, i.e. cash flow. If you're a company looking to reduce your DSO, where do you start? There is no benchmark to evaluate yourself on that. So we've been quietly building a benchmarking service for our customers, really to look at just this issue. In so doing, we discovered a number of insights on how activities impact collections performance. And so, what we want to do is share some of those as we examine these different factors. But let's look at, first of all, where people start out and what manual activities really involve. So as a result of the new normal, we talk to our AR community a lot on just to get insights from the front line. And, what we're seeing is that things are changing so rapidly that, people are really starting to embrace technology as a way to start addressing that. And that's because if you look at the manual process of AR, our benchmarks show that an AR staff person without AR automation requires anywhere from 25 to 40 minutes to complete a phone call. This includes prep time to get information together. They may have to log into multiple systems, pull that information, chase down invoice status, et cetera. It's call time with the customers that, first of all, they have to get the contact information, then the call time. And then there's post-call administration, writing up notes and reporting, to different stakeholders what's going on. And, it's not just phone calls that are done on an average day. There's also emails. And so the average staff person to complete, anywhere from 40 to 60 outbound communications, a combination of emails and phone calls, is about what gets done. And the impact of that is really that that's limited capacity, which means only 10% of customers are really contacted after invoice presentment. So things like reminders, gentle reminders don't go out. And that's because the staff is typically focused on, 60 days past due and above. So, those are kind of real challenges. As a matter of fact, the Hackett Group reported that one of the biggest obstacles to sort of collections performance was the lack of technology adoption in accounting departments. And it's easy to see why. Most accounting departments use Outlook and Excel as their technology stack. With no integration to the ERP, means data is constantly being transcribed between email and the ERP. With no automation, it means that things like follow-ups, promise tracking, dispute resolution is all manual. And with no activity management, visibility into what got done isn't available and it's hard to control. So we wanted to take another quick poll and see how many people how people are managing their activities today. Interesting. So 83% currently are using Outlook to do that today. So thank you for sharing. There was one last vote that came in. It turned out to be 85%. So thank you for sharing. And one of the things that we've seen is the migration to remote work has really exposed some underlying conditions around the accounts receivable process. And as we return and reopen and go back to maybe a new normal, some of these underlying conditions have to be addressed. First, the move to remote work exposed the problem that we talked about of manual processes. And that's because the pandemic increased the workload, and that's all centered around the collections risk. The collections risk went up. So traditional credit scores are sort of out the window, and AR staff now want to contact as many customers as possible to assess collectability. Who do you call first? What are the priorities? A lot of that decision-making is up to individual people. So each staff person is starting the day building a list of to-dos and everything else based on their inbox and their manual aging reports, and that takes time. Then, setting out to call and ask for confirmations. Installment plans are becoming more common. And there needs to be, extended terms in a lot of cases. So these confirmations, plans, extensions, where do you record them? Well, it's really Excel. So those are that manual process has really been exposed just because in a lot of cases the workload has gone up. And in some cases, we're actually hearing from people that the departments are, they are letting go individuals. So there's more work, there's fewer people, and it's just exposed the challenge of Outlook. The other is this manual reporting, because the reporting requirements went up. Rather than weekly forecasts on cash position, people want daily, if not more than daily. And there's a growing requirement for AR staff, because they're working remotely, to sort of cut and paste together a report of what's got done today. And having that is, again, a loss of valuable time that could be spent really engaging and having conversations with customers in a proper service-oriented way. And we're going to just take our last poll and jump into the benchmarks. What we wanted to know is just, how many people will continue to work remotely after the pandemic? So the largest, just giving feedback to everybody, the largest poll, 73% said partially, 13% 100%, and then 13% only as required. So that's just data for you to know what your peers are doing. So thank you for sharing that. All right, let's jump into the benchmarks. So what we did is we looked at 3 strategies involved in AR automation. One is automated communications. Automated communications lets you take all the transactional things that you would want to be able to, update customers on, and do it in a highly personalized way. So sending very personalized reminders, making sure to send statements, all of that stuff, but do it so that it's just automatically sent out at the appropriate time. And then there's collections activity management. So we were talking about this a little bit earlier, but what is the next best activity for somebody to do? How do they have a digital workspace that allows them to manage the work and really reduce the overhead associated with completing these activities, having automation in the background that does things like automated reporting, all of those kind of pulling information together for you so you don't have to chase it down in multiple systems. And then the third one is really around customer self-service. How do you move your customers online so they can just go to a portal, make payments, download invoices they need, basically save you the time of having to respond to inquiries that they may make, but also accelerate those payments in through digital transactions. So those are the three things that we looked at and how they impact overall performance of collections. The data itself, we mentioned we've been collecting this data and putting it into our service. We look at 10 months of historical data, the number of industries that the companies came from, if you will. The firmographics to this is really 18 different industries, revenue sizes anywhere from 1.4 million to 1.4 billion, so a large range. Average revenue of the companies in this benchmark is 205 million. The receivables that we analyzed was 1.2 million or 1.2 million accounts, I apologize. And that had 13.2 million invoices that came into those accounts. Invoice ranges were very broad, anywhere from hundreds of dollars to over 100,000. And then we looked at kind of pre and post implementation of these to kind of figure out, well, what was happening prior to that implementation, and then post implementation, what were the impacts? The first one we examined was the impact of automated communications. These automated communications include, as we talked about, reminders, statements, past due notices. When we compared pre and post implementation and looked at companies not using automation, the average was, in terms of average days delinquent, was 39 days was the average days delinquent. With automated communications enabled, the average day delinquent dropped to 18. That was over 53% improvement. It's interesting. One of our customers has a quote that says, really, communication is their critical success factor, and that automation is, key to that. And so in the new normal, these automated communications are starting to have an impact. And even, the interesting part is, even if you're using automation already, we've started to work with companies to really think about maybe changing the frequency of that. Also adding things like, service notifications and installment plan offers. So thinking about the customer experience of, that whole invoice to cash process, and starting to use some marketing techniques as we think about it. The next benchmark that we looked at was really kind of balancing in the importance of the human touch. Accounts receivable is a customer relationship role. When we ask our AR community what they find rewarding about their role, the two factors that dominate are building relationships and helping other people. And that kind of comes through, and it was interesting to see it in the data. In this data, you can see, again, the impact of automated communications compared to only relying on collectors. So the left-hand side is showing that the past due average was 23% when it was primarily automated communication, and that past due was 34% when it was primarily collector-driven, or it had less than 40% automated communication. And then what you see in the middle was interesting is when it was balanced between automated and collector-led communications, it came out to be down to 16%, and that's over a 50% improvement compared to where just collector-led ones are. So thinking about how that mix of automated and collector-led kind of blends itself really has the right impact. And it's one of the things that continue to test and improve on. So the previous mix or benchmark that we just looked at a mix of activities between automated and collector. This benchmark looks at kind of the number of communications per invoice to see how that would impact past due. So we split companies up based on average invoice amounts because we thought there might be a difference, and we did see a difference here. And then we divided each of those up into 3 buckets where it was based on the communications per invoice they sent on average. And as you can see, companies that communicate more frequently with their customers have a lower past due compared to the ones that communicate less frequently. And that was really one of another insightful thing is just doing the invoice presentment and saying, oh, it's taken care of, or waiting until it goes past due. There's a lot of communication that can happen between those 2 points. And it's important to make that happen. Across every category, we saw this trend. The drop was significant, and really frees up time for AR teams to communicate more with customers and use the right combination as we talked about. The final benchmark that we're going to look at today is customer self-service. Customer self-service is a way of enabling customers to complete activities on their own rather than the AR team having to do that. From what we heard in our AR community, the fact that paper checks are coming in really increases past due and average days delinquent. So we examined that. In particular, we examined the impact of accepting online payments. Online payments is gaining in priority and popularity based on the new normal. And you can see the impact in terms of online payments by a drop of 14 days in average days delinquent and 8% drop in past due, just at those 2 different benchmarks. Other factors of how customer self-service reduces past due and ADD is that the customer has immediate access to the information they need to pay you, such as POs, statements, missing invoices. It takes all the barriers out of the way of having to email back and forth and coordinate calls, et cetera. So it's a powerful way to enable your customers to make it easy to pay you. So, our key is to focus on, what are the right things to get paid? As we saw that through these benchmarks, and we do these benchmarks quarterly, so we're going deeper and deeper into them. One key is leverage automation. Another is maximize your team's activities and outreach, and then move customers online. If you could just kind of pursue each of those, in an incremental fashion, I think you'll see big improvements in your own performance. We do have, one thing I wanted to mention is we do have an ebook on the topic. If you'd like to access it, feel free to visit anytimecollect.com and register for the ebook. And with that, we'll open it up for Q&A.